Thank you, Mr Deputy President. It's a shame that the Greens continue to establish an approach which is often closed-minded and inflexible. They do usually speak in very strong ideologies without the acceptance or consideration of new ideas or different viewpoints in this chamber. And I find it particularly ironic that that is their stance, given that often they talk about wanting to embrace the modern economy and the modern world. Indeed, through you, Mr Deputy President, Senator McKim made a fine first contribution to this place just the other week, talking about how we now have new sharing economy with new abilities for each of us to be engaged in our economy through apps like Uber, Airbnb, Freelancer, all of those elements. And I might be corrected, but I don't think an Uber driver is getting penalty rates. I don't think somebody selling their home on Airbnb who works on a Sunday to prepare is getting penalty rates, and I don't think somebody who is consulting and offering their services on Freelancer is getting penalty rates. So I find it ironic. I find it quite ironic that on the one hand the Greens say we should adapt to the modern world, we should embrace new areas of innovation, but on the other hand they are the staunchest defenders of the conservative view, a view I must say I don't necessarily disagree with, but a conservative view that Sundays should be a day of rest and contemplation. And as I say, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but what I do want to add before I respond further on this bill is to correct what I view as a incorrect statement or incorrect implication by Senator McKim that somehow this country is becoming more unequal. It is not. We are very fortunate in Australia that we have a progressive income tax system, a strong family tax benefit system, and the evidence is clear that over the past 10 or 15 years, including through the Howard government and the Rudd government, that largely the gap between the haves and the have-nots, as Senator McKim described them, has remained remarkably stable. Now, that's not true in all other parts of the world. I accept that completely. That is not true in all parts of the world. But we should not seek to always draw parallels with the United States of America. We are a different country. We have different welfare systems. We have different laws in the United States of America, and well may that remain so, because we have, I think, a very strong country that should be defended. But this bill does not go, in particular, to those broad issues about inequality. It's a bill to provide greater flexibility for some businesses in how they negotiate penalty rates. Now, I will say at the outset I do not support this bill, and I will go through reasons why, but I'm not going to reject it in the kind of ideological and closed-minded approach that we just heard from Senator McKim. I want to credit my colleagues and senators for bringing forward this bill and bringing forward an approach which is clearly sought to deal with some issues that particularly face small businesses in our hospitality industries. There is no doubt that our current award-based system is making it difficult for some small businesses to hire people on Sundays, to employ people on public holidays. And if you go to the tourist areas of Queensland, to the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast, where I am a senator for, you will often find cafes and restaurants closed on those days because, in their view, they cannot afford to pay their workers and justify opening. Now, we need to find a balance. This debate should be about a balance. We should find a balance between wanting to ensure that we give people an opportunity to have a job and work on those days and earn an income for their families, and also be properly compensated for the fact that they are working on public holidays or Sundays, which I agree with Senator McKim, and I absolutely agree should be solemn days as much as possible. But I do want to say from the outset that the idea that Sunday should be a day of rest is not one that's always been the case through history, but it's one that's obviously been a long-held tradition in Western societies. The word Sunday does not itself reflect, through its etymology, a day of rest. It obviously means a day for the sun, and it comes from pagan cultures which often often had a cult of the sun, often worshipped the sun. And there was a day, indeed, for all of the planets, and the various names of the 7 days of the weeks generally accord with different planets in the Roman planetary system, and the sun was another day that was dedicated to a heavenly object. It had a sacred place, but it was not necessarily a day of rest in the Roman world. Not until at least Emperor Constantine, and some of those that are familiar with Roman history in this place will know that Emperor Constantine was the first openly Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, and it was he that established the practice that Sunday should be a day of rest. And I think it's worthwhile quoting what Emperor Constantine said then on the 7th of March 321 AD. Constantine said that on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not so suitable for grain sowing or vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations the bounty of heaven should be lost. So even at the very first inception of the notion that Sunday should be a day of rest, there was a conception that some practices, some work could still be performed given its nature, and the common sense view that you couldn't simply leave the farm for a day and have a day of rest when there might need to be essential work done. So even Emperor Constantine recognised that. And may I say, while I'm not in the corner down there that represents the Nationals Party, may I say that that's just another reason why we should hold our farmers in high regard in our community, because they don't usually get a day of rest. They certainly don't benefit from penalty rates at any time. They have to work when the sun is up, when the cows need milking, when the grain needs harvesting, or when the sugar needs planting. At any time, they have to work, and they don't receive any of the protections and benefits of our award system. But they do something that's even more essential than almost any other work that we do, and that's to provide food. Now, this bill is about not the production of food; it's about the service of food. The service of food, largely in either supermarkets or in cafes and restaurants, and our hospitality industry. This bill is saying that those industries should be allowed to have different arrangements for penalty rates on Sundays. And again, there's some rationale for that. Just like planting the grain must happen whatever day of the week is the best. Providing someone bacon and eggs for breakfast often happens best on a Sunday. For cafes and restaurants, they often have to and do open on a Sunday, because it's the day of the week that the rest of us are lucky enough to potentially have some time off to go to the shops, do our shopping, or spend the Sunday morning reading the papers, having a cup of coffee. So in that respect, their activities are not dissimilar to those of farmers, and maybe some greater degree of flexibility is warranted. But as I said in my opening remarks, I cannot support this bill for a couple of reasons. First, I do, and I am, and I in this case share Senator McKim's conservatism that we should try to seek to keep the day of Sunday as much as possible a day of rest and reflection, and particularly time with family. And public holidays as well play an important role in our society, to often as a time of coming together as a nation and to do things that aren't necessarily related to work, but to reflect on how lucky we are to be Australian, and how lucky we are to have had people that go before us to protect this nation and make it what it is today. So I don't disagree that there should be some recognition of that, and some a reward for those people who otherwise can't have those days of reflection, be they nurses, doctors, firemen, or indeed people that perhaps do less crucial work but nonetheless still very beneficial work in brewing a coffee or serving lunch. They do deserve some reward for that. But I think the tradition of ensuring that these days remain a day of rest is one that's close to the heart of our parties that are often do fly the flag for these conservative values. And while I as a National Party senator, will quote Menzies cautiously, although I'm not going to quote him actually, I remember reading a biography of Robert Menzies, and was very interested in his work practices that his biographer A.W. Martin wrote at the time that Menzies in the 1920s estimated that he worked around 80 hours a week. The courts would sit from 10:30 a.m. to 1 and 2:15 to 4:15 in the afternoon, and his habit was to work long into the night and get up as late or as conference obligations permitted. But he would also have a routine, and the demands of his wife and children meant that they lived a very quiet life, and almost always Menzies took Sunday off to rest and spend time with his family, though they sometimes went to church, but they took no further part in wider church activities, and Sundays was a day for reading and occasional picnics and outings. And I sort of sometimes, I as a Conservative long for those sort of days. Sunday's a new Monday for us in politics sometimes, but it would be perhaps a better and more considerate community if we did take more time, and I certainly should take more time to spend with my family and reflect on life and pause. Because I think while there's somewhat a Christian origins for the day of rest and Sunday, it's actually something that all of us as human beings yearn for, to have some time away, some time to reflect, and that will usually make us better and more productive people if we're able to have that time every week. I would like to speak further on this bill, but I only have half a minute remaining, and my final comment is, while I welcome the Senator's consideration and creation of this idea, I do think it introduces a level of bureaucracy that's unneeded. We do have a Fair Work Commission process in place to decide penalty rates and weigh up these issues. There are a review of those, and I think introducing a piece of legislation which only deals specifically with a couple of sectors and specifically with few businesses is too much red tape, and we should let the Fair Work Commission decide and balance these issues between days of rest and the needing for reward.